Well, what a regatta that was. The 2021 Olympic regatta is officially over, but my golly, did it have us on the edge of our seats. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and this is the Rowing Chat Olympic Review, and I'm joined by my special guest today, Drew Ginn. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good to see you again. And yes, convey your sentiment about what a regatta we've had. And we always knew Tokyo and the games over there on the course were going to throw up all sorts of curveballs, but it's been just fantastic to watch and fantastic to see some outstanding performances, some world best time. It's been incredible.
Yeah, I think the key thing that any fan wants from a regatta is you want the fastest crew to win the medal. You want them to display all the athleticism and the skill and the maturity that they have. You also want to be able to ensure that the best crews in the world get their chance on the world stage simultaneously. And, you know, if there are upsets and disrupts, handling those things is part of maturity, is it not, as a crew?
Yeah, and I think good lead into just a point that I can make is, and I remember watching the men's quad the other day, and I thought to myself, and we had our local rowing club, Mercantile Rowing Club, all on the Zoom call together and cheering the crews along for the fours and the quads and all that sort of stuff, and for the semi-finals later in that day. But what really stood out to me, and I wondered this, I was like, how many countries have done their real homework on the Tokyo course? How many countries have really thought about the kinds of water they're going to be faced with? And I'll give you a reflection was the water surface was obviously clearly cross-tail, and that's a challenge in terms of bounciness, but it seemed to have a ripple and roll underneath and a movement underneath that was another dynamic that often people wouldn't appreciate. But if I had been an athlete, you would have been sitting here with your coach would have been having conversations like, how do we get ready for that? And how do we anticipate all those things along the way? And when you see people coming undone in those moments, not performing because of skill errors or mistakes or things they just should have been aware of, it's really sad, but it's also great to see some athletes who cope really well with the conditions.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want the people who pull it out of the bag on the day to be the right ones going across the line. Let's dive into the results that we have seen today, because my golly, we've both got such big grins on our faces. Let's start with the women's singles sculls. Emma Twigg pulled off what she needed to do, but she did it with style and such grace.
Oh, look, and I said to you the other day when we were talking about reviewing the races going forward, and Emma for me was a real standout the way she rode that single scull. Full credit to everyone else in the field. And I thought the Russian girl and Lobnik from Austria did an outstanding race, but Emma was clearly the dominant athlete, and you wouldn't have known it going in. Because she didn't get a chance to be exposed to them all. But the way she rode her semi-final and then the way she rode the final, she put herself in front early. She rode away from the field. She got a margin that was unassailable, but she was super relaxed the whole time. And what I loved about it was she was stepping clear of the water. So she's done a lot of work on Caroe, I think, and down there where they train in New Zealand, and often they get all sorts of conditions. But to know that she's come fourth, and then she's got a gold medal, just so well deserving.
Yeah, it is. And of course, talking about that semi-final, or rather both of those women's singles semi-finals, Janine Gemelin produced her final in the semi-final. It's now clear. And that is what happens sometimes, you know, at an Olympic regatta. Praskatin, the Russian girl, is clearly a star for the future. And, you know, how smart of her coaching team to pick her out of a really slow quad and realize her potential and give her the confidence to race in the single. I mean, she's young.
Well, she's young, and I think you're exactly right about timing it for the final. So you've just mentioned two athletes who clearly, I think, probably spent a bit of energy for the right reasons to get into the final. But Praskatin, for my mind, when you know that she's wound home very, very well in the World Cup during the year and also during this regatta, you sort of have in your mind, you sort of go, okay, she spent a little bit too much energy. And Emma Twigg, the contrast, looked like she was trying to conserve energy in the other races and not give away too much. And so you're right. Like if you have your best race in a semi or your best race in a heat, you've got to roll the dice and give it a go. But the athletes who have their best race in the final and can manage themselves through the whole week, as we know, that's why they become Olympic champion. You don't just become Olympic champion by chance, do you?
Yeah. And keeping your powder dry. I mean, there are too many genuine stories of people showing their speed too early in the regatta. And of course, then that prepares the opposition. And in rowing, it's often quite hard to keep a trick up your sleeve. You know, you have got to qualify for the next round of the racing. And let's move on and talk about the men's singles, because, you know, let's face it, Natsukis just pulled an amazing race twice out of the bag. He showed us in the semi how he can race. Everyone went, oh, you know, maybe he's going to be like Mellon. And you're like, no, he isn't.
It was like, where did he come from? I did say to someone the other day that he's clearly been training on the Aegean Sea for sure, because he handled the water exceptionally well, better than most. But also, I think his semi-final and his final seem to have real courage. And there'll be question marks over the other scullers who have been around for some time as to how did they not read the situation with him? How did they not get back on terms? But what he did, he just showed them that he had no fear about the single scull. He kept it upbeat, but he stayed really clean. And he rode it like a true lightweight, which is, I know that I can't let it get bogged down. I've got to get out. I've got to keep the speed up. He was very consistent over the whole 2,000 metres. I really thought he was going to get rode over at the end, but he just kept going, didn't he?
He did. And you're right. He was a former lightweight. So in 2018, he was rowing in a lightweight crew for Greece. And I went and checked his Wikipedia page. Someone has already updated it.
Quickly.
Very quickly indeed. So he's the star for the future. Obviously, you know, the Bosch, Martin, Nielsen, you know, tussle. That's exactly what we want at the top of the sport. Several amazing athletes that on any one day, you know, any of them could have made that final and made the medal a different colour. But wasn't it a great race?
Oh, it was a fantastic race. And I think the pressure that was on, the time that they rode in the conditions, yes, okay, guys like Mahe and a few others have gone slightly quicker, but not a whole lot quicker in the grand scheme of things. And I think the thing that I did love was your Bosch from Norway, the way he sculled, it was that very tall posture at the back, long out front, really quick connection. And Nielsen was rowing the same way. And so then when you've got Dimmer Martin sitting behind them, really hauling on the second half and really accelerating, you've got not only contrasting styles and just different pacings, but it meant that those three other scullers with the Greek sculler, there was just so much pressure in that centre of that field. It's exciting to watch. What I thought was, when you think about adding in one or two more scullers who, we talk about the German sculler not making it through, other scullers like Mahe retiring just prior to the Olympic Games. I'm not saying they would have all been in the final, but it's amazing how sculling has that situation where all of a sudden just names pop up in the final year like they have, and they perform so exceptionally well. And it looked like a bloody tough race, I tell you.
Yeah, I say athlete development doesn't always naturally align with the Olympic cycle. If you're a known athlete, yes, of course your coaches are, prepping you for that fourth year. But if you're a young and upcoming athlete, well, that the Russian woman Proskatskin and Natsukis, both of them have come right at the right time for them, and that's so good for the sport.
Yeah, and I think it sends a really good message to people, which is, you could be a fifth place getter in the World Championships 2 years ago and you can win a gold medal, right? So that provides insight for the Greek sculler. You could be in a quad that's not performing as well as you'd like, and you've done all the work, and you come out of the quad and all of a sudden you get a chance at single sculling. And historically what you've seen, and this is what I love about the scull, is there's always a couple of athletes that have come out of crew boats who now get to shine. And it doesn't mean that crew wasn't particularly great, but the amount of scullers that we've heard over the years, which is they're a bit lost in a quad or a four or a double, and all of a sudden they get their chance to be a single sculler, and they have 2 or 3 years where they absolutely fly. And we've seen exactly that here. But I do like the fact that there's also some names that we're familiar with as well. So you get to have that contrast every Olympic cycle as to how's this Olympic cycle gone. But it certainly seems that in the women's sculling, if you think about this time that Emma's rowed, and the men's sculling, you think about the time that men have rowed, the field, while it may not be quicker than ever before, it certainly is as competitive as it ever has been in the Olympic cycles before. So it's exciting.
It is very exciting. And I remember Mahe was one of those people who came out of an unsatisfactory fall.
Yep, definitely.
The women's 8. What a barnstorming race those Canadians pulled out. They kept their powder dry and didn't show how much speed they had till that absolutely last final.
Correct. And I think I had no knowledge of how the Canadian women's 8 was going to go. I did watch their women's pair and thought to myself, I really liked what they were trying to do, the intent behind it, the leverage, the rhythm, to watch that 8 push themselves in front of the field and then hold off so much pressure that was happening in the middle of the race, and to show the field, what it was like to sort of sit on top of it. And what I really liked was they seemed to be moving the boat every single stroke, and there seemed to be an efficiency, but just seemed to be so much raw effort, but really well combined. So they kept the cards close to their chest. They played the best poker game probably that's ever gone on in the week of an Olympic competition. And you think that they had crews behind them, like New Zealand. Like everyone was expecting New Zealand to potentially come through really strong at the end. US, in terms of what they'd done in the early rounds, looked so strong and faded away. So there was a lot of pressure on there. And China, I mean, we're watching them in the outside lane, and at one stage I'm going, China are going to sneak down the outside here and get the result. But yeah, Canada, clean set of heels for the rest of the competition, that's for sure.
Just goes to show it's very, very hard to do an extremely skilled race in an 8. So many people, so many different variables, and they pulled it all together. And I can only just say that was so much respect for the fact that they kept their boat speed as all the challenges were coming. They didn't waver, not once.
No, and I think, Rebecca, the thing that I'd add there is it's obvious when an 8 is clear about how they're going to execute their plan, and it's obvious when an 8 is clear about their commitment to each other. And so we know that if an 8 gets a bit of margin in the first 500, it doesn't mean they win the race. But if that then translates into them being able to push through that second 500 like they did, then that clarity of thought, they all buy into the process, they all commit, they don't hold back at all. Because we know down the back end of a race, particularly in tailbreeze, you're running out of time.
Yep.
And so that courage and conviction, is what really stood out for me. But they rode technically very well as well. It looks so efficient.
Yeah. And let's move on, of course, to the blue ribbon men's 8s race. Again, the Germans were there to be knocked off their pedestal. They have had an incredible string over years, and many, many different athletes going into that boat over the years. And they definitely went out aiming to win that race. There's no question.
Yeah, I think they had a very good idea of what they had to do. I just don't think they were in the space to be able to execute. I think there's a question of the athletes that had in the past have probably had a better run of results, so they've got a bit more confidence in themselves. They seem to be watching them behind. Once they didn't get quite the margin maybe they thought they were going to get, you could just sort of see that look of determination on the faces, which is there, but all of a sudden it's almost like that look of desperation. And a lot of the German 8s that have gone so well always stayed really calm and composed, and it was almost like it didn't matter if anyone came through or they were half length down. In the past, they always have that sort of look of belief. Where this crew, I just think there was a nervousness about them and just not quite the same confidence. So once New Zealand were moving through, what I was watching was guys like, say, Hamish Bond, and we know his track record and history, but there was that laser-like focus down the boat and that simple determination. It looked like they believed the whole way down the track that they could succeed and row their boat really fast. And I think that's the difference there, isn't it? A crew that really believes versus a crew that's trying to put themselves in a position. I mean, that's my take on it. But what I loved about the 8s was watching GB, watching Germany, US, Netherlands, all there. At one stage, I thought New Zealand were going to get rowed over, but the ability for them to find a second bit of wind towards the back end of the race was just extraordinary.
Yeah, they do. Both the New Zealand 8 seem to have this characteristic in the third quarter of doing just kind of walking their way ever so gradually. They don't seem to do dramatic kind of, let's blitz them for 20 or 40, or I think Steve Redgrave and Matthew Pinsent used to have a 50 push in the middle of their pairs race. They don't do that. It's so subtle that unless you're watching the line of boys and you're watching the bows, you almost don't realize it's happening. It's like a sort of stealth move.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's uncompromising, and it's got a very clear, I suppose, understanding of physically, you just hold yourself at the limit. You don't want to pop yourself above and try to sort of do 20 or 15 strokes that don't really last, which in the past, when they've been in the big boats, both the guys and the girls, they've often not had the speed and been in the race early enough to be able to do that. But in the small boats, it's worked really effectively for them. So to see that translate that way, but also, and it reminded me a lot of the 2004 US 8, where they were slightly lower rate, really composed, moving the boat really well every stroke. The New Zealanders were doing as fast as they possibly could per stroke, but staying composed. So all of a sudden, it's so hard to come back through them. And the ability, as you say, for them to slip away was just because they was doing that sustained effort, which is not one stroke of effort or 10 strokes of effort. It's like we're doing 240 strokes the best we possibly can. And that's what's really, I think, deserves a lot of respect, is that's hard in an 8, but it's what drives an 8 really well, doesn't it?
So in New Zealand, the 1972 gold medal winning 8 are legends. Most of the guys are still alive. So many boathouses here have a big kind of oil portrait print. It's massive. It's like 6 foot long. And they have this in so many different boathouses up and down the country. And of course, I'm now thinking, we've got new legends today.
Yeah, and that's the key, isn't it? I think any sport, I mean, we can live, and we love our heroes and we love our past heroes. We've had the same thing in Australia. But it's so nice for new heroes to be born. And it's so nice then to be able to combine their history that's taken so long. You talk about back in the 70s to now, it's not like New Zealand haven't had a desire to go better in the 8s. I mean, they've certainly had a small boat program that's been very successful, but that 8 desire never went away. And those older athletes always loved and were passionate about the 8. Every single coach has always been passionate about the 8s. And so to see that transpire into a result, and I mean, really think about it, like they pulled possibly one of the best athletes we've ever seen in the sport from a pair into the 8 to really back the 8 in. And so that for me just sort of says they had a lot of confidence to give this 8 a real shot and prioritise it. And they've now got new heroes.
Of course, it's taken a very long time in the making. The core of that group came through from juniors together through under 23s. They had 2 or 3 years they were winning the under 23 8s. And so it's probably been 7 years in the making, which of course begins to help us to see that rowing is a really long game when it comes to building a squad that's capable of winning Olympic medals or even getting into Olympic finals.
Yeah, and what you've said there, I think that really resonates. I think the thing that I often think about is we give credit immediately to who's there, right? So we give credit to the immediate coach, we give credit to the athletes who are there in the training programs, but what you've said is it's a 12-year lead-in, that sort of situation. And I think about the run the Germans had, and then I think about the run the Canadians have had and GB's had and all that sort of stuff. Is these runs start a long time in the making, and the influencing forces of good coaches, good quality coaches, good peer group athletes they're training with. But to know that a group like that's come through the juniors and under 23s, and if you think about someone like an Ian Wright who possibly would have been coaching some of those guys at under 23, and then Knowles had an influence on them. But if you now look back and you go, wow, that's a long time in the making. Well, when Germany had its dominant period leading back up to 2012, 2008 they were chasing Canada with an under 23 kind of crew and kind of squad, and so that had come out of the 2004 situation, which hadn't been overly successful. So that was an 8-year period leading up to that as well. So I think we can look at those patterns and understand that for every country, every boat class, every group of athletes, it's not just made overnight, is it?
It certainly isn't. And for the British people, I'm British born, I really feel for Great Britain. They had far too many 4th places, but actually that's a positive because they've got people who have the capability to go faster. And we all know people retire after one Olympic cycle. If those athletes stick with it, they've got, a silver medal winning quad, they've got a bronze medal winning 8. They've got really strong bones and a structure that will see them through to Paris.
Yeah, and I need to declare it here, that given that I'm Australian, we love to knock off the Poms. That's how we'd always talk here. And the Poms always love to knock off the Australians, right? So let's just get that out of the way. But I think you're right. I think I spoke to you the other day, and I think we talked about the men's quad, and we talked about the Dutch winning the men's quad and some of the other crews and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things I really liked was I'd seen the GB quad, I thought, perform pretty well in their heat. And I thought the way they were rowing, youngish crew, you did rectify that, that some of them have been around a little bit of time. But I think you're right. There's still great performances there that are sitting just below the surface. And while they won't get the recognition like they've had, it's hard to go through a golden period and compare yourselves to that. But a 4th place isn't that far from a gold medal, And we always talk about there's a void and there's a gap and it's hard and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is you get 1 or 2 key things right that you maybe didn't quite get right on the day, in the week, in the 6 months leading up to. There could be a selection decision that they thought, we'll take a gamble on this and this hasn't quite paid out. So I think for GB, like Australia, we've been through the challenging times of not quite getting the results we wanted to get, but what you can't do is crucify athletes or crucify coaches. Everyone's doing the work they can to be the best they can be. And we've seen people make mistakes, and we've seen people not perform under pressure. But also we've seen, and I said this to you the other day, when people peak at certain regattas. So the four, for example, that World Cup they had back in the season, they flew. And when I watched that, I was like, wow, we're in trouble here. Like, if they can maintain that form to the Olympic Games, that's possibly the gold medal. But in the back of my mind, having been an athlete for so many years, I was also like, yeah, but they almost look too good. They almost look like they're too ready right now. Now, there was some crew changes, but to sustain that peak performance all the way through the games is hard. So they've slid off as some crews have come through, but that doesn't mean that crew can't win a gold medal, right? And this is what we used to tell ourselves as well, is that if you've got a crew in the finals, back into the finals, front of the finals, I mean, if you're way off the pace, it's a bit different. There's a big margin there. But I think believing that you've done the work, believing that in the next 3 years for the Paris Games, that you've got the right sort of squad, there's just a few tweaks you've got to make to get things right. And that's confidence in the system.
So from your point of view, as an awesome foursome member, have you handed your T-shirt off now?
I'm going to make a comeback, Rebecca. No. I don't know. My T-shirts are all too old and they're too smelly, and the athletes wouldn't want them. But I did love, and I shared this with you offline before, and I really liked what Nick Green, he was doing our commentary here in Australia for the Australian races. Obviously, Crossy was doing the commentary generally for Channel 7 through the international feed. And so I tend to listen to watch all the races. So I listen to Crossy's commentary, but I'd tune in for Nick's. The morning of the men's and women's fours final with the quad, Nick sent a message around to our WhatsApp group. And we've been excited about this stuff for years. We've been looking forward to crews doing well in fours and Australian crews doing well, like we all do. But Nick turned around and said, I've got a good feeling about it. I reckon our men's and women's fours could be good for gold. And if they win gold, I'm gonna really acknowledge that we want to hand over the mantle of they're now the awesome foursome crews, right? So, and I think when we've had great results, we're excited. That's easy to do. But when we've had results which are either been medals, like silver medals in London, I still felt all the four rowers from the past were always still supportive of us getting there, always wanted us to get there and get gold. And so there was always this positivity about we can't wait to see a great result. And if there's not a great result, you have empathy for the athletes, you have empathy for the coach, you just hope they can get it right for the next time they compete. So it is a handing over of the mantle. What they may not have to do, though, is they might not have to do fruit commercials like we did to make fools of ourselves. But I've been sitting there thinking to myself, you know, they're better than we are. They're better than we were. You know, they're faster crews. They rode 42 in conditions that maybe weren't perfect, but were still quick. Well, the fastest I ever went in a four, I think, was only 44, sort of thing. And the original Awesome Force, and the fastest they went was about 48, you know, sort of thing. So they're faster, they're better athletes. And so to see them get that credit for all the effort and all the work put in, and our girls were the same. We've had some amazing women's fours over the years who, when there wasn't an Olympic fours boat, you didn't get to see that. And finally they get an Olympic fours boat and they get to perform. So I think everyone behind the scenes was so excited for them, particularly the legacy of going on with these boats, that's for sure.
Certainly, one of the things that I'm really enjoying about social media and the opportunity to podcast with people like you, it is so different from the traditional, you know, stand-up voice to camera for the ABC, the BBC, whoever it is. It's so truncated. I was completely unaware of all of this behind-the-scenes work by former athletes, champions like yourselves, encouraging and supporting the current team. I mean, yes, you kind of guessed it was possibly going on, but Sarah Cook said they had a WhatsApp group with every woman who'd been in an Australian women's quad in recent years. They were all in the same WhatsApp with the current squad and, you know, giving them their support and their encouragement and answering their questions. Like, how amazing is that? That is psychology 101. Boost them up.
Definitely. And I think that can play a massive role into making, like, there's pressure on anyway. And I think when we think about different countries and pressure, I think past athletes like ourselves can make those things worse, because it's almost like we separate ourselves and go, our generation was better, and, you know, and we're the stars and all that sort of stuff. But I think if you can help the next generation, because they feel like they haven't made it yet, right? So, and they feel like they don't deserve to be in the category of the past champions. But if you can help them connect and help them realize that you're just like them and you are exactly like them. So WhatsApp groups like that. I mean, I saw Mike Mackay coaching at Mercantile Rowing Club this year. Matt Ryan was coaching at Melbourne University Rowing Club. They coached the state team for Victoria at the national championships, and the Victorians had success against the New South Wales athletes, but New South Wales had some of the best athletes in the team. But what I liked was you've got guys like Mike contributing to the sport. You've got guys like Maddie Ryan, who's won Olympic silver medal, contributing to the sport. They're sharing as much knowledge as they can. They want the athletes to succeed. I even had conversations with James Rook, who's the coxswain of the women's, who reached out and was like, I want to pick your brains for, what do we need to be thinking of in the final part of the preparation to get things right? And so you just want them to do well, and knowing that there's a connection takes pressure off, because all of a sudden they feel like they're part of something rather than them just going out there doing it for themselves. And I think that's a really important thing in terms of influence.
There was a wonderful Instagram thing of James sitting on the start, holding up his phone in the boat, and it had been captioned, "One last check of Tinder." And then the next picture was the Canadian coxswain leaping out of her seat, and they said, "Sorted."
Match made in heaven.
Well, at least they're the same height. How long do cycles last in international rowing? We've talked about, generational mantles. We've talked about, we know some athletes have short international careers, some have long international careers. We know that there's an enormous amount of support in coaching, in strength and conditioning, in performance management. How long do cycles really last in practice?
I think I've had a bit of a rule of thumb for a while, and I've probably been influenced by some coaches on this as well, is that you often watch a bit of a run where you sort of see the first games of a new cohort of athletes, and potentially some new coaches might produce some results that are a bit surprising. And I say surprising being a good surprise, and they might produce some results that could be better, but they're encouraging. And so you see that in a first cycle, that group, if there's capacity in it and there's clarity about the future and it's a long-term build, that group could not only get a couple of gold medals here, get more gold medals here, and get more gold medals here. I think the 12 years of that is probably the cycle that, for me, rule of thumb sort of makes sense for. And if you think about all the runs we've seen, even of athletes, where if they nail it for the first games, then, you've got something very special. So Hamish Bond at his first games didn't get a result. Eric Murray at his first games didn't get a result, but then they had a run of results, and Hamish has extended that even further out. And if you look at the Everswindle sisters, I'm going to use some New Zealand references here. If you look at the Everswindle sisters, it was a sort of 3-game sort of cycle period.
Yep.
But what I think New Zealand have shown, and they've probably had the longest run out of anyone that I think we've seen, but they also had a couple of downtimes, not because they weren't capable in Beijing, they got some illness, and not because they weren't capable in Rio, but some things just didn't quite go right, but they still got some results from athletes that have been around for a long time. So it's probably rare that a country returns like they have returned so quickly when they have a games result in Rio that probably wasn't as what they would expect. But I think generally it's a 3-game cycle. I think what you've seen with Great Britain is it was the build up to the home games. What you saw with Australia was the build up to the home games. And then you get this tail off period. So we managed to last from 2000, pretty good 2004 still, equal to, in fact, because we didn't really get the results in Sydney that we would have hoped. But we had 96, 2000, 2004, and we managed to hang on to 2008. And I'm not saying we didn't have a great team, but we had some newer athletes that were learning the craft again. And so they got medals, but we just didn't crack it for gold. But that then has now risen out the other way where the new younger athletes are getting results. So I think that 3-game cycle works pretty well as a rule of thumb. But I do think there's athletes that fly against that. And there's athletes that sometimes, if you do a lot of churn, means that you don't get the 3-game cycle out of them, because all of a sudden you move through them too quickly and they don't have the experiences they need.
And of course, as we talked earlier, having an under 23 or senior B team being developed below that, we didn't see the New Zealand 8 guys in Rio because they were racing at a different level.
Yep. And I think that's what I look at this Australian team, just to be biased here. I look at the Australian team right now and everyone goes, isn't it amazing what John Caroe and Ian Wright have done with these squads? Yeah. We've centralised. We've got two coaches that are very clear about what they're trying to achieve in the training standards. They've got some great coaches with them, and they've got a talented group of athletes, both men and women, and it's quite equal. But what gets forgotten really easily is this probably started 12 years ago. And if you think about some of the things we were doing in Australia with our juniors, our under 23s, our US engagement, all that sort of stuff. So while we weren't getting under 23 and junior results like some other countries, we're still engaging with the athletes really well. We're looking after the athletes. The US engagement, I know for a lot of countries now, is so important. They go to the US for 2 or 3 years. You don't want to lose them. And you don't want to just find out about them at the end of the time in the US. You want to engage with them on the way through. So I think this Olympic Games for Australia, I think this success is as much about those coaches and those crews today as what it is about those last 10, 15 years of development that those athletes have been through, which hasn't always been gold medal results at juniors, gold medal results at under 23s, but has been a really good developmental process where the sport's kept connected to them and made the pathway clearer, I think, which, any pathway programs, you get that right for a nation like Australia or GB or New Zealand or the US, and all of a sudden you can get results over a sustained period of time for sure.
I was at a presentation where a data scientist was reviewing exactly what you've said. Who are the athletes medaling? When did they start getting success? And basically the short answer is people who medal at juniors are really, really unlikely to medal at the Olympic Games. Full stop. You are totally the exception if you manage that, partly because juniors rewards athletes that are young and early developers, and rowing as a sport rewards the endurance, slow developing, physically later developing athletes. And so, if you're running which I'm not, fortunately, if you're running a talent ID program, you need to bear that in mind, and you need to have a broader picture of what are we doing for the sport from grassroots level up. Because if you get to juniors and then you stop, what does that mean for the sport? If you get towards under 23s and you're not selected, can you drop back into something that you feel validates you, is satisfying and enjoyable? Can you leave a senior team, have a family, start your career, whatever, and a few years later come back into masters rowing and still feel that you're in the sport at a satisfactory level with pleasure and enjoyment? Because I rowed with a lady called Kate Groves, who was a Barcelona and Seoul member of the British team. And it was years before she was prepared to go to the FISA Masters Regatta.
Yeah.
She said, we went and raced together. And after our first race, and we won, she said, I thought this was going to be a walkover. She said, these are really hard races. And I'm like, yeah. That's the longevity of the sport.
That's right. And I think, just to add to that, I think philosophy that I've felt for a little while, and again, I think people like Noel Donaldson sort of helped shape my thinking very early days. Chris O'Brien, the same thing, was if an athlete goes to an under-23 championships, the result really doesn't matter. But what matters is that they become motivated by that experience. They've continued to develop technically, they've continued to develop physically, but they've still got room to go. Now, if they get a fourth place, let's have the honest conversation about, what could have been different to get the better place and all that sort of stuff. But what I liked, and I had this experience in 1997 with Noel, was Noel's conversation with the group, 1994, sorry, Noel's conversation with the group was very much around trying to help us be inspired and aspire to future opportunities on the team, and not to get caught up in thinking that a fourth place in under 23s meant that we weren't going to be ever good enough. And so I think the best coaches really get this, which is, I don't need them to be stars at 20 years of age, but I need to have someone who is motivated, who has some very good basics technically, has a start of something very good physiologically. But if you give them to me for 15 years and I can work with them regularly and build them up and build them up and build them up, we can turn them into gold medalists and medalists. So I fundamentally believe in that. And I think guys like Noel and Chris believed in that. So I think a lot of the best coaches know that you've got a parallel process. You've got your stars for the next event, and you've got some talent developing for future events. But what's not popular, in Australia, I don't know how it is in some of the other countries, but if you talk to the Australian Sports Commission, previously when I was involved as head coach, was you try to explain that, hey, Rio, we're trying to get these results with these athletes, and Rio, we want to take these athletes, and whatever results they get is fantastic, but we're setting them for Tokyo, and these athletes may be setting for Paris. Now, that's the mindset you've got to carry, but too much of our funding is geared around 2 years or 4 year cycles versus what are you doing to develop? What are you doing to engage? How are you setting this up in the long term? Now, if we can change that model and metric, I think countries will have greater success over the long term. But I like seeing athletes who have their first Olympic Games, which isn't success, but all of a sudden they've come home, they feel valued, and they're ready to get into it. And that next 4 years, they train better, and all of a sudden they do get a result. James Chapman, when I rode in the 4 in London, his first Games was a reserve for the team, which we know is the worst job ever for any athlete. No love for them whatsoever, really. A lot of respect for the work they do and how they support the team, but they don't get really all the kit. They don't get the accreditation. They don't get called Olympian. His second Games was in an 8 that didn't perform, so still didn't have a great experience. Loved the Olympic Games. third Olympic Games gets a silver medal. Now, I promise you that if you designed that as an idea, which is we just got to get into the first one, let's see if we can get a result in the second one, third one, that's where we capitalise on it. Well, there's your 12-year cycle.
One of the discussions that I've been involved with is about the funding of sport in Britain. British rowing has already been given and told the amount of money it's getting between here and Paris. And Dame Catherine Granger is head of one of the funding bodies. And she, of course, was, in the TV studios and was amping up some of the fourth place results that happened today and yesterday and on Wednesday. And some of the commentators offline were saying, well, she said, oh, Vicky Thornley, that was an extraordinary performance. And I said, well, on one level, she knows her really well. They were doubles partners together. She might know that that is an extraordinary performance for that athlete. But fourth place doesn't feel extraordinary in the context of an Olympic Games. But, you've got to look long term. And one of the nice things I've learned is that British funding for sport has now gone off medals, because it used to be that if you didn't get the medals, your funding got cut. So Taekwondo, for example, was a really good example of a sport that struggled, got some medals, and then finally got some funding. And I don't know what the solution is, but funding for sport is a great conundrum.
Oh, I totally agree. And so I certainly have thought about it quite a lot. I don't have the answers, but let's use Vicky Thornley as an example. If you were sitting in GB rowing right now, I'd say immediately we're having a conversation with her about the next 4 years. We use Emma Twigg as an example, fourth place. We then turn around and say, and I assume it's Paul Reedy coaching her. We then turn around and say to the coach, right, we still want you to influence other athletes, and Vicky, we want you to help be a part of engaging with a squad to make a difference there, but we really want to support you to see if you can convert this from a fourth place to a medal or a gold medal. Now, imagine if in 4 years' time, you're strategic about it, you take pressure off the short term, you trust them. They're going to do the work, they want to get there, but that fourth place is then fourth place that progresses to something even better, rather than fourth place and go, oh, we can put more pressure on, we don't think we've got the right person. We don't know that we've got the right coach. We don't know that we've got the right knowledge and skill and all that sort of stuff. Don't reinvent the wheel. Let this build. Kim Brennan was the same thing. Kim Brennan, her first 8 experience, she wasn't a star. The 8 wasn't the best crew ever, but it grounded her to then go and have that double and single scull experience, which then set up her single scull gold. Now, again, broken record here, but that's a 12-year cycle. So, and Vicky Thornley, I don't know her full background, but she's been around for some time. She's been in lots of situations. This is the best result of the best rowing I've seen her do. But back her in now, give her the chance and encourage her to say, hey, you've got 3 years. You don't even have 4 to last. We've got 3 years to see if we can just inch it forward. If she goes 1.5 boat lengths quicker, she puts pressure on winning a gold medal. Now, that gets pretty exciting in that equation, I think, for an athlete and a coach, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And 1.5 boat lengths is about 4 seconds. It's Correct. Not a lot, actually, in the single.
No.
Now, Anne Perry wants to know, can you tell us about how Australia selects rowers for the 4 versus the 8? So, and in general, most countries pick a priority boat. So Great Britain, I believe that the 8 was the priority, the 4 was the next boat, and then the pair. In New Zealand, it was I think it was 8 and then pair, because I know that the stroke of the pair used to stroke the 8. What was the pecking order for Australia in this Olympics?
Well, so I must admit, I wasn't close enough to it. And obviously with his squad was very protective of making sure that the group and he, a bit of a bubble, but my gut feel is I think they were focused on the 4 as the priority boat. They were trying to give the 8 and the pair as much opportunity, hence the reason why the athletes changed at times. And if you look at the 4, they've changed athletes. And I think the reason why they did that was not because they were sure of who the athletes were eventually going to be in the 4, but they wanted to make sure they had experiences across the whole squad of people believing that they could actually achieve results. So my gut feel is he was trying to win the 4. They were really ambitious about trying to win the 8 and potentially, getting a medal or winning the potential pair. Now that's hard. We know that. So the focus seemed to be that they got the best 4 on the water. The 8 certainly seemed to be it was the next boat picked. And we had a very good pair. I was really surprised that they didn't perform. But you've certainly got to have an order, because what you can't do is you can't say at the regatta over 5 or 6 days or whatever it is, we're just going to throw it all open and just pick whatever. You've got to sort of go in with a bit of a focus of one boat, next boat, next boat. And so what you don't want to have is the last boat feeling like they've done a truckload of work or racing and then burnt out by that. So I think they've done a lot of squad-based work. They've worked out the crews well in advance, but certainly the 4 seem to be the priority.
Yeah, absolutely right. Drew, it's been a delight having you on Rowing Chat to talk about this wonderful, wonderful Olympic regatta. This is definitely going to be a regatta that's going to be talked about for years and years. And I, for one, have just had the most marvellous week.
Yeah, I felt like a little kid again, I must admit. Yeah, you watch World Cup regattas and they're exciting, I think, when you know the sport. But when you see the Olympic Games and you see, I think, results that pop up that sometimes you watch and you go, oh, how have they got that wrong, or how have they made that mistake? Like, that makes you feel like you're there. But to see some athletes perform who you just know are so well deserving, I get emotional. And Emma Twigg, just knowing what she's done, that makes you emotional to know that time has been well paid back now in terms of performance. So, yeah, I loved it. And I love the challenge of the Tokyo course. You know, some people sort of get upset about that sort of stuff and throws up curveballs, but it's all about preparation for the environment you're going to be in. So they've pulled off an amazing games, and the typhoon didn't stop us, right?
Yeah, let's hear it for rowing over the weather. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and this has been a special Rowing Chat. Please follow us, subscribe. We're in all the podcast apps, and give us your ideas and feedback about what would make interesting episodes for the future. Till next time, and hopefully it won't be 3 years hence. Bye-bye.